You think one-pan dinners were just modern convenience cooking? Think again. Long before meal kits and non-stick skillets, families across rural America created masterpieces in single cast iron pans that fed entire households from one flame. Let's dig into 30 forgotten one-pan dinners no one makes anymore. Skillet ham and red-eye gravy was the kind of breakfast for dinner that kept farming families going through long winter evenings. Country ham, salt-cured and hung in smokehouses for months, was sliced thick and fried in cast iron until the fat rendered and edges turned crispy and caramelized. The magic happened after the ham was set aside. Black coffee was poured directly into the hot skillet, sizzling against the rendered fat and browned bits clinging to the iron. This created red-eye gravy, named for the reddish eye that formed when coffee and fat separated. The gravy was thin, intensely salty, and slightly bitter, meant to be soaked up with biscuits or spooned over grits. For families who raised their own hogs and cured their own meat, this dish cost almost nothing beyond the coffee. The entire meal came together in under 15 minutes, leaving nothing but satisfaction and a well-seasoned skillet behind. Smothered rabbit with onions transformed wild game into Sunday-worthy eating through patience and a heavy cast-iron lid. Hunters returned with cottontails cleaned and jointed, ready to be dredged in seasoned flour and browned in bacon drippings until golden. The browned pieces were removed, while thick sliced onions went into the same fat, cooking down soft and sweet. The rabbit returned to nestle among onions, everything covered with just enough water to create steam, and the heavy lid went on. The skillet simmered for hours, tough meat slowly surrendering to tenderness, while onions melted into silky gravy. Families valued this because wild rabbit cost nothing but the hunt, and long cooking required little attention while chores got done. The finished rabbit fell off the bone into gravy, carrying the richness of bacon fat and natural sweetness of slow-cooked onions. One skillet fed a family of 6 with nothing left but clean bones and full stomachs. Dutch oven possum and sweet potatoes represented Appalachian cooking at its most resourceful. Possums trapped in late autumn, fattened on persimmons and acorns, gave their meat a sweetness that surprised the unfamiliar. The cleaned animal was parboiled to remove gaminess, then placed in a large Dutch oven surrounded by quartered sweet potatoes and onions. A mixture of bacon fat, molasses, and vinegar was brushed over everything before the heavy lid was sealed and the pot nestled into fireplace coals. Hours of slow roasting transformed possum into fork-tender meat, while sweet potatoes absorbed rich cooking juices, becoming almost candied. This wasn't desperation food. It was celebration food in communities where possums were plentiful and store-bought meat was not. The Dutch oven made it possible to cook an entire meal with no attention beyond occasionally rotating the pot. Families served it for special occasions, proud of the skill required to prepare it properly. Cast-iron squirrel and rice turned small game, every child learned to hunt into a complete dinner requiring nothing but one heavy skillet. Young hunters brought home their catch cleaned and quartered, ready for the pan where pieces browned in lard until skin turned crispy. The squirrel was set aside while onions and celery softened, followed by long-grain rice that toasted until translucent. Stock was added along with the browned squirrel, then the skillet was covered until rice absorbed every bit of liquid and meat pulled easily from delicate bones. The flavor was nutty and rich, the squirrel meat darker and more complex than chicken could ever be. For rural families, this represented abundance found in woods behind their homes rather than expensive grocery stores. Children learned hunting wasn't sport, it was survival, and their contributions carried genuine weight. One skillet, a few squirrels, and a cup of rice meant dinner was handled with real dignity. Pork jowl and turnip greens came together in a single pot to create something far greater than either ingredient could offer alone. Pork jowl, fatty, flavorful meat from a pig's cheek, often smoked or cured, gave richness that infused everything it touched. The jowl went in first, rendering its fat while developing a crispy exterior. Turnip greens gathered from fall gardens after frost sweetened their leaves were added in great handfuls along with water, vinegar, and a touch of sugar to balance natural bitterness. The pot simmered for hours, greens cooking down to silky tenderness while absorbing smoky pork flavor throughout. Families valued this because both ingredients were home-raised or home-grown, requiring no cash outlay. The pot liquor was never discarded. It was sipped with cornbread or saved for soup. This was peasant food elevated through understanding that slow cooking and good fat could transform the humblest vegetables into something approaching luxury. Chicken bog was a low-country Carolina tradition that turned one old hen and a bag of rice into a feast for a crowd. The dish got its name from the way rice bogged down in rich chicken broth, becoming almost creamy while still holding individual grains. A whole stewing hen, past her laying days, went into a large cast-iron pot with onions and celery, simmering until meat fell from bones. The chicken was pulled out and shredded while rice went directly into seasoned broth, cooking until it absorbed nearly all liquid. Shredded meat returned along with generous butter and black pepper. Everything stirred until the bog reached its characteristic consistency, wet but not soupy, rich but not heavy. Churches served it at fundraisers, families made it for reunions, and neighbors cooked it when someone needed feeding. One pot could serve 20 people, making chicken bog the original crowd-pleasing one-pot meal born from necessity and perfected through community. Oxtail rice pilau carried African cooking traditions through generations of southern kitchens where nothing went to waste. Oxtails, once sold cheap to those who knew their value, were browned in a deep cast-iron pot until caramelized, their collagen-rich meat promising silky richness after long cooking. Onions, tomatoes, and spices joined the pot before liquid was added, and everything simmered for hours. When meat began falling from vertebrae and cooking liquid had reduced to concentrated flavor, long-grain rice was stirred in to absorb every bit of goodness. The pilau finished covered, rice becoming tender while oxtails contributed gelatinous texture to bind everything together. This dish stretched protein across many plates, with rice carrying rich flavor far beyond what meat alone could provide. African-American families perfected this technique, understanding that bones held as much value as flesh when cooked with patience. The dish showed how immigrant cooking traditions adapted to available ingredients. Salt pork and potato skillet was the dish that fed families when nothing else remained in the cellar but preserved meat and root vegetables. Salt pork, heavily cured pork belly that kept for months without refrigeration, was sliced and fried in cast iron until it rendered crispy cracklings floating in pure white fat. Thick sliced potatoes went into that fat, absorbing salty richness as they fried until edges turned golden and centers became creamy. Onions were often added for sweetness, and the whole skillet came to the table still sizzling. The dish required no fresh ingredients, nothing that couldn't survive winter in a root cellar. Families during lean times knew they could always manage if they had salt pork put away and potatoes stored in sand. The meal provided fat for energy, carbohydrates for fuel, and enough salt to keep bodies working through hard physical labor. This wasn't fancy eating. It was survival food that happened to taste like comfort itself. Smothered pork steaks turned tough cuts into tender meals through nothing more than a covered skillet and thyme. Pork shoulder steaks, inexpensive slices from the hardest working part of the pig, were seasoned heavily and browned in hot cast iron until crusted. The meat came out while sliced onions and bell peppers went in, softening in rendered pork fat. Everything returned to the skillet with just enough liquid to create steam. Then the heavy lid went on and the flame turned low. Hours of slow smothering broke down tough connective tissue while vegetables melted into gravy. The finished steaks could be cut with a fork, saturated with rich sauce created by their own braising. This was weeknight food in working-class households where cheaper cuts were all budgets allowed. Mothers knew that the same weight of shoulder cost half what chops did, and with proper technique produced meals just as satisfying. The smothering method freed time for other work. Neckbones and rice was the Monday dinner in countless Southern households, a tradition born from economic necessity and perfected through generations of careful seasoning. Pork neckbones, sold cheap because they required work to eat, were browned in a deep skillet, their exposed marrow and cartilage promising richness no other cut could deliver. Onions, garlic, and seasonings joined before liquid was added, and the pot was covered for long simmering. When meat had loosened from bones and cooking liquid reduced to concentrated flavor, rice was stirred in to absorb every bit of goodness. The finished dish was eaten with fingers and spoons. Neck bones required picking, the meat hidden in crevices that rewarded patience. Children learned early that the sweetest meat lived closest to the bone. This dish cost almost nothing but fed families completely, the rice stretching rich pork flavor across plates that satisfied without requiring expensive cuts. Salmon croquettes and fried potatoes was the Friday night dinner that stretched a single can of fish into a meal for the whole family. Canned salmon, bones, skin, and all, was mashed with egg, cracker crumbs, and onion, then formed into patties that fried in cast iron until golden and crispy outside while staying moist within. The same skillet held sliced potatoes that cooked in the remaining oil, absorbing the salmon's richness while developing caramelized edges. For Catholic families observing meatless Fridays, this was the answer that satisfied without breaking religious rules or household budgets. Canned salmon cost pennies and kept indefinitely on pantry shelves, making it reliable protein that didn't require refrigeration. The croquettes were served hot from the skillet alongside the potatoes, often with a squeeze of lemon or splash of hot sauce. Children who grew up with this dish remember the satisfying crunch giving way to tender, flavorful fish inside. One can, one skillet, and everyone ate well. Tripe and onions turned the least glamorous part of the cow into something surprisingly delicate and satisfying. Tripe, the honeycomb-textured stomach lining, required hours of cleaning and simmering before it became tender enough to eat. Once prepared, the tripe was sliced thin and cooked in a cast-iron skillet with abundant onions, butter, and milk until everything melded into a creamy, rich dish. The texture was unlike anything else, slightly chewy but yielding, with a mild flavor that absorbed the sweetness of slow-cooked onions. Working-class families valued tripe because butchers practically gave it away, considering it waste. Those who knew how to prepare it understood they were getting genuine protein for almost nothing. The dish appeared regularly in immigrant communities where nose-to-tail eating was simply how things were done. Served over toast or with crusty bread to soak up the creamy sauce, tripe and onions provided comfort that cost almost nothing but delivered satisfaction that rivaled expensive cuts. Venison liver hash was the hunter's breakfast that turned organ meat into morning fuel for another day in the woods. Fresh deer liver, prized by those who knew its value, was sliced thin and fried quickly in bacon fat alongside diced potatoes and onions. The liver cooked fast, staying pink inside while developing a caramelized exterior that added depth to the hash. The potatoes absorbed the rich mineral flavor of the liver, while the onions provided sweetness to balance the meat's intensity. For families who hunted their own meat, liver was the first reward of a successful hunt, eaten fresh, while the rest of the deer was processed and preserved. Nothing from the animal went to waste, and the liver provided iron and nutrients that would sustain another day of hard work. The hash came together in one skillet in under 20 minutes, feeding hungry hunters before dawn broke over the mountains. This was practical eating that happened to be genuinely delicious. Shrimp Perloo was the Low Country's answer to feeding a crowd when the creeks were running with shrimp and the pantry held little else but rice. Fresh-caught shrimp were cooked shell-on in a deep cast-iron pot with bacon, onions, and tomatoes until their juices enriched the cooking liquid. Rice went directly into that flavorful broth, absorbing every bit of shrimp essence as it simmered to tender perfection. The dish was somewhere between a pilaf and a jambalaya, uniquely southern and deeply tied to coastal communities where shrimp were plentiful and free for those willing to cast nets. Families gathered for Perloo suppers that turned a good catch into celebration, the one-pot meal serving dozens without requiring anything beyond what the water and garden provided. The shrimp were peeled at the table, their shells having already given everything to the rice. This was community food that brought neighbors together over something simple but profoundly satisfying. Ham, hock, and cabbage was the cold-weather dinner that simmered all afternoon and fed families for days. A single smoked ham hock, the joint between foot and leg, sold cheap because it was mostly bone and fat, went into a deep pot along with a quartered head of cabbage and enough water to cover everything. The pot simmered for hours while the ham hock surrendered its smoky flavor to the broth and the cabbage softened to silky sweetness. By evening, the meat had fallen from the bone in tender shreds, the cabbage had absorbed all that rich, porky goodness, and the kitchen smelled like comfort itself. Families stretched this meal across several days, reheating portions and adding potatoes or beans to extend it further. The ham hock cost almost nothing but delivered flavor that expensive cuts couldn't match. Children grew up knowing this smell meant warmth and security, a pot on the stove that promised no one would go hungry. Beef heart and root vegetables transformed an organ most people discarded into a one-pot meal of surprising tenderness and depth. Beef heart, dense, lean muscle that worked constantly during the animal's life, required long, slow cooking to become tender. Sliced thick and browned in a Dutch oven, the heart developed a crust before being covered with carrots, potatoes, onions, and enough liquid to braise. Hours later, the heart had become fork tender, its rich, beefy flavor intensified by the slow cooking, while the vegetables absorbed the concentrated broth. Butchers sold hearts for pennies to customers who knew that this undervalued cut contained more flavor than expensive steaks. Families who understood offal cooking recognized beef heart as treasure hidden in plain sight at the meat counter. The finished dish was hearty enough to satisfy the hungriest workers, the vegetables providing bulk while the heart delivered genuine protein. Nothing fancy, just smart cooking that turned the overlooked into the celebrated. Raccoon and sweet potato skillet was the autumn dish that turned successful trapping into a meal worth remembering. Raccoons fattened on corn and fruit before winter were prized by rural families who knew their meat, when properly prepared, rivaled pork in richness. The cleaned raccoon was parboiled first to remove any gaminess, then the pieces were browned in a cast-iron skillet before being surrounded by thick-cut sweet potatoes. Everything simmered together under a heavy lid until the meat fell from bones and the sweet potatoes had absorbed the rich, slightly sweet cooking juices. This wasn't poverty food. It was resourceful eating in communities where raccoons were abundant and store-bought meat meant a trip to town most couldn't afford. Families served it for special occasions, proud of the skill required to prepare it well. The combination of savory meat and naturally sweet potatoes needed no embellishment beyond salt and pepper. One skillet held everything needed for a complete meal. Kidney and onion skillet was the breakfast that British immigrants brought to American shores, where it became working-class fuel. Beef or pork kidneys were split, cleaned, and sliced thin, then cooked quickly in butter alongside abundant onions until just done through. Overcooking made kidneys tough and rubbery, but proper technique yielded tender, richly flavored meat with a distinctive mineral taste that onions helped balance. The dish came together in minutes, making it practical for mornings when work couldn't wait. Kidneys cost almost nothing at the butcher counter, making them affordable protein for families watching every penny. Served on toast or alongside fried eggs, kidney and onion skillet provided iron and nutrients that would power a full day's labor. The smell was unmistakable, slightly pungent but appealing to those who grew up with it. Children of immigrant families remembered this as the taste of their heritage, a dish that connected them to the old country while feeding them in the new. Chicken gizzard rice stretched the least expensive part of the bird into a complete one-pot dinner. Gizzards, tough, muscular organs that required long cooking, were browned in a deep skillet until caramelized, then simmered with onions, celery, and seasonings until tender enough to cut with a fork. Rice was added to cook directly in the flavorful braising liquid, absorbing the concentrated chicken essence while the gizzards continued softening. The finished dish was rich and satisfying, the gizzards providing chewy texture while the rice carried deep poultry flavor throughout. Gizzards cost pennies per pound when they could be bought at all, often included free with whole chickens or sold in bulk at the butcher counter. African-American cooks particularly valued this dish, transforming scraps into something that rivaled meals made with expensive cuts. The technique required patience but not money, proving that skill in the kitchen could compensate for a thin wallet. One skillet and thyme created something genuinely delicious. Pig feet and lima beans was the dish that proved nothing had to be wasted when families understood how to cook with care. Pig feet, split and cleaned, sold for almost nothing, went into a deep pot with dried lima beans and enough water to cover everything. The pot simmered for hours, the collagen from the feet slowly dissolving into silky richness while the beans softened and absorbed that unctuous broth. By evening, the meat had loosened from the bones in tender strips, the beans had become creamy, and the cooking liquid had reduced to concentrated flavor. Families seasoned the pot with whatever the garden and pantry provided: onions, bay leaves, black pepper, maybe some hot sauce for kick. The finished dish was served in bowls, the feet eaten with fingers while spoons handled the beans. Children learned early that the sweetest meat lived in the crevices that required patience to find. This was economical eating elevated to genuine satisfaction. Smothered quail was the hunter's reward that turned tiny birds into a meal worth celebrating. Wild quail, no bigger than a fist but packed with dark, flavorful meat, were cleaned and browned whole in a cast-iron skillet until their skin turned golden and crispy. The birds came out while sliced onions and mushrooms went into the rendered fat, cooking down until soft. The quail returned to nestle in the vegetables, everything covered with stock or cream, and the heavy lid went on. The skillet simmered until the tiny birds became tender enough that meat slipped from delicate bones. Hunters who worked the fields and fence rows brought home these birds by the dozen during season, and smothering was the method that made the most of their rich flavor. The gravy absorbed the concentrated essence of wild game, while the vegetables provided bulk to stretch the small birds further. Served over rice or biscuits, smothered quail proved that size didn't determine value when skill and patience were applied. Catfish court-bouillon was Louisiana's gift to one-pot cooking, a rich stew that turned muddy-bottomed fish into something approaching royalty. Fresh catfish fillets were simmered in a roux-thickened tomato broth seasoned with the holy trinity of onion, celery, and bell pepper, plus generous amounts of cayenne and bay leaf. The court-bouillon, pronounced court-bouillon in Cajun country, cooked low and slow until the fish flaked apart and the broth had concentrated into something deeply complex. This wasn't quick cooking, but meditative simmering that filled kitchens with aromas announcing dinner to the whole neighborhood. Fishermen who pulled catfish from bayous and rivers turned their catch into this stew when company was coming or when Sunday called for something special. The dish was served in bowls over rice, the broth soaking into each grain while tender fish broke apart with every spoonful. Catfish court-bouillon represented the French heritage of Louisiana cooking adapted to local ingredients and local tastes. Tongue and potato hash transformed an organ meat that made squeamish eaters look away into something undeniably delicious. Beef tongue required hours of simmering before the tough outer skin could be peeled away, revealing tender, finely grained meat underneath. The cooked tongue was cubed and fried in a cast-iron skillet alongside diced potatoes and onions until everything developed crispy, caramelized edges. The flavor was rich and beefy, milder than liver, but more interesting than ordinary roast, with a texture that was simultaneously firm and tender. Butchers sold tongue cheap to customers who understood its value, while others walked past without a second glance. Families who knew how to prepare it considered tongue a special occasion ingredient, worthy of Sunday dinner or holiday tables. The hash came together in one skillet, the potatoes absorbing the meat's rendered fat while onions added sweetness. This dish proved that the parts others rejected often held the greatest rewards for those willing to learn proper technique. Crackling cornbread supper turned the byproduct of rendering lard into the centerpiece of a complete one-skillet meal. Cracklings, the crispy bits of pork skin and fat left behind after lard was rendered, were stirred into cornbread batter before being poured into a hot, greased cast-iron skillet. The bread baked until golden on top with a crackling crisp bottom, the pork bits adding bursts of salty, porky richness throughout. This wasn't a side dish, but the main event, served with beans, greens, or just buttermilk for dunking. Families who butchered their own hogs treasured cracklings as the cook's reward, nibbled while rendering lard or saved for special cornbread. The skillet method created a crust that no baking pan could match. the preheated iron sizzling when batter hit its surface. Children fought over the corner pieces where the crust was thickest and the cracklings most concentrated. This was peasant food elevated through understanding that byproducts could become treasures when treated with respect. Pigtail rice was the dish that proved every part of the hog carried value when cooked by hands that understood patience. Pigtails, bony, fatty, and sold for almost nothing, were browned in a deep pot until caramelized, their collagen promising silky richness after long simmering. Onions, garlic, and seasonings joined before liquid was added, and the pot was covered for hours of slow cooking. When the meat had become tender enough to slip from the bones and the cooking liquid had reduced to concentrated flavor, rice was stirred in to absorb every bit of goodness. The finished dish was eaten with fingers and forks, the tails requiring work to eat but rewarding patience with succulent meat and gelatinous richness. African American and Caribbean cooks particularly valued this dish, understanding that bones and fat created depth that lean meat couldn't match. The rice stretched the tails to feed a crowd, each grain carrying the essence of long-simmered pork. One pot transformed scraps into sustenance. Beef shank and barley was the cold-weather meal that simmered all day and filled bellies through the longest nights. Beef shanks, cross-cut sections of leg with marrow-filled bones, were browned in a Dutch oven until deeply caramelized on all sides. Onions, carrots, and celery joined the pot before barley and stock were added, and the heavy lid went on. The pot simmered for hours, the connective tissue dissolving into silky richness while the marrow melted into the broth and the barley swelled to tender chewiness. By evening, the meat fell from bones in tender shreds, and the cooking liquid had become almost gravy thick. Butchers sold shanks cheap because most customers wanted faster cooking cuts, but those who understood braising knew shanks held more flavor than expensive steaks. The dish required time but not attention, freeing hands for other work while dinner handled itself. One pot fed families for days, the barley stretching rich meat flavor across many meals. Chitterling stew with rice was the dish that carried African American foodways through generations of both scarcity and celebration. Chitterlings, thoroughly cleaned pig intestines, were simmered for hours until tender, then cut into pieces and combined with tomatoes, onions, peppers, and spices in a deep pot. The stew cooked low and slow until flavors melded and the chitterlings became silky rather than chewy. Rice went in near the end to absorb the rich, slightly funky broth that defined this dish. The aroma was unmistakable, pungent to some, inviting to those who grew up with it, announcing that something special was cooking. Families served this during holidays and special occasions, the lengthy preparation time proving love and dedication. The dish required skill and patience, knowledge passed from generation to generation about cleaning, cooking, and seasoning. Chitterling stew represented survival food elevated to celebration, proof that the parts others discarded held genuine value when prepared with care. Smothered dove was the September dish that turned the opening of hunting season into a proper celebration. Wild doves, small but intensely flavored birds, were cleaned and browned in bacon fat until their skin crisped and rendered. The birds came out while onions softened in the drippings, then everything returned to the skillet with just enough stock to create steam. The heavy lid went on and the heat dropped low, allowing the tiny birds to braise until tender. Hunters who worked the sunflower fields and grain stubble brought home their limits during those early fall days, and smothering was the method that honored their effort. The gravy absorbed the wild, slightly gamey essence of dove, while the slow cooking ensured meat practically fell from delicate bones. Served over rice with the rich pan gravy spooned generously, smothered dove proved that small game could create meals as satisfying as any store-bought meat. This was tradition passed from father to son. Liver mush and fried apples was the Appalachian breakfast that paired two humble ingredients into something greater than either alone. Liver mush, that peculiar regional creation of pork liver, meat, and cornmeal pressed into loaves, was sliced thick and fried in a cast-iron skillet until crispy on the outside and creamy within. In the same pan, apple slices cooked in the rendered fat with a sprinkle of sugar until they softened and caramelized at the edges. The combination of savory, mineral-rich liver mush with sweet, tender apples created a plate that satisfied both body and spirit. Families in North Carolina's Piedmont region grew up with this pairing, the liver mush providing affordable protein, while apples from backyard trees added seasonal sweetness. The dish required nothing but one skillet and ingredients that most rural households had on hand. Liver mush and fried apples represented the kind of practical, delicious eating that defined country cooking at its best. Fatback and hominy skillet was the ultimate survival meal that required nothing but preserved pork and dried corn to create something genuinely satisfying. Fatback, thick slabs of pure pork fat cured with salt, was sliced and fried in cast iron until it rendered crispy cracklings swimming in pure lard. Hominy, dried corn treated with lye to remove hulls and puff the kernels, was added to that hot fat, frying until it developed golden, crispy edges while staying tender inside. The combination provided fat for energy and carbohydrates for fuel, requiring no fresh ingredients whatsoever. Families during the leanest times knew this dish could sustain them when nothing else was available. The fatback added salt and richness, while the hominy provided substance and subtle corn sweetness. This wasn't fancy food, but it was honest eating that kept bodies working through hard days. One skillet, two shelf-stable ingredients, and families survived another winter. Chicken liver and onions was an old-fashioned delicacy that seniors cherished for both its rich flavor and remarkable nutritional value. Chicken livers cost almost nothing at the butcher counter, often sold for pennies per pound because younger generations had forgotten how to appreciate them. The livers were dusted with seasoned flour and fried quickly in bacon drippings until the outside developed a golden crust while the inside stayed creamy. Sliced onions were cooked in the same fat until soft and caramelized, then piled over the livers like a sweet, savory blanket. The combination was intensely flavorful, rich, mineral, and deeply satisfying in a way that chicken breast could never match. A half-pound of livers fed one person generously, providing iron and B vitamins that doctors recommended for elderly patients. The dish came together in under 15 minutes and required nothing more than a hot skillet. Chicken liver and onions represented a time when nothing was wasted and flavor was prized above convenience. Stuffed pepper skillet was a clever adaptation that delivered all the flavors of traditional stuffed peppers without the fuss of actually stuffing anything. Ground beef was browned with diced onion, then chopped green peppers, rice, and canned tomatoes were added to the same skillet. Everything simmered together until the rice was tender and had absorbed the tomatoey liquid. The peppers softened but retained enough texture to provide contrast, while the beef contributed savory richness throughout. A sprinkle of cheese melted over the top added indulgence without requiring extra effort. The dish came together in a single pan in under 40 minutes, far faster than traditional stuffed peppers that required blanching, stuffing, and lengthy baking. One skillet fed a senior for 3 meals, providing protein, vegetables, and carbohydrates in perfect balance. Stuffed pepper skillet proved that classic flavors could be reimagined for easier preparation without sacrificing the satisfaction that made the original beloved. Salmon patty skillet was a thrifty creation that turned an inexpensive can of pink salmon into golden, crispy cakes that satisfied like nothing else. Seniors on fixed incomes knew that canned salmon provided protein, calcium from the soft bones, and nutrients that doctors would later praise as essential. The salmon was drained, flaked, and mixed with crushed crackers, a beaten egg, and minced onion before being shaped into patties and fried until the exterior turned deeply golden. The inside stayed moist and tender, with a flavor both familiar and comforting. These patties were often served right in the skillet alongside fried potatoes or with a simple white sauce poured over top. A single can yielded 3 or 4 patties, enough for 2 dinners with careful portioning. The recipe required no special ingredients and came together in minutes, making it ideal for evenings when energy was low. Salmon patties represented the ingenuity of making something genuinely delicious from pantry staples. Cheddar and broccoli omelette made a hearty egg dinner with bright color and bold flavor in minutes. Eggs were whisked with a splash of milk and a pinch of black pepper, then poured into a hot skillet where butter foamed at the edges. Fresh or frozen broccoli florets steamed quickly in the microwave or in a small pan, keeping their green snap and gentle sweetness. As the eggs began to set, sharp cheddar cheese was scattered across the surface, releasing a nutty scent as it melted. The broccoli folded inside added texture and an earthy contrast to the creamy eggs. In less than 10 minutes, the omelet slid onto a plate, golden on the outside and gooey within. Served with toasted bread or a handful of greens, it offered both comfort and nourishment, proving that dinner can be simple, yet feel complete. This dish turned basic staples into a meal that pleased everyone at the table while leaving only one pan to wash, making it ideal for nights when time and patience were in short supply, but good food was still essential. Tomato and sugar. Open-faced sandwiches were one of those quirky summer snacks that showed up when gardens were full, money was tight, and lunch had to be quick and simple. You sliced a fresh tomato, buttered a piece of bread, sprinkled sugar over the top, and that was it. A little sweet, a little juicy, and ready in minutes. It sounds strange today, but back then, this was a familiar plate across farm towns and small kitchens all over America. The tomatoes were easy to grow, the bread stretched what you had, and the sugar turned it into a treat that brightened up long summer days. Families leaned on recipes like this when grocery lists were short, and mealtime had to be stretched with what was already growing out back. You would find this simple snack scribbled in old cookbooks, passed around at neighborhood picnics, or taught to kids as one of their first kitchen lessons. It might seem forgotten now, but for plenty of folks back then, tomato and sugar sandwiches were a fast, filling reminder of how far a little garden and a little creativity could go. Egg salad melts on English muffins were Grandma's way of stretching a dozen eggs across a week. She would boil a batch at the start of the week, mash them up with mayonnaise, mustard, a pinch of salt, and maybe some chopped celery if it was in the drawer. Then, when dinner time came and the fridge was looking bare, she would pull out a few English muffins, split them open, and pile on the egg salad. A slice of cheese went on top, American, cheddar, or whatever was left, and it all went under the broiler for a minute or two. The edges of the muffins crisped, the cheese bubbled, the egg salad warmed and got just the right kind of messy. It was not elegant, but it was real. It was food you could eat with one hand and clean up with the other, and it made a dozen eggs stretch a whole lot farther than you thought possible. Meals like this did not just feed people. They taught you how to make do, stay full, and carry on. Sardine and potato hash was a thrifty meal that combined two of the most economical protein sources into something surprisingly delicious. Canned sardines, often overlooked on grocery shelves, provided omega-3 fatty acids and calcium from their soft, edible bones at a fraction of the cost of fresh fish. Diced potatoes were fried in a skillet until crispy. Then the sardines were added and gently broken apart, their oil mixing with the potatoes to create a rich, savory coating. Onions and a squeeze of lemon brightened the dish, cutting through the richness of the fish. The combination was salty, satisfying, and packed with nutrition that doctors would praise. A single can of sardines and 2 potatoes fed one senior a complete dinner for under 50 cents. The dish required only a skillet and about 20 minutes from start to finish. Sardine and potato hash represented the kind of practical wisdom that seniors carried from harder times, knowing that cheap ingredients properly prepared could nourish both body and soul. Italian sausage hoagies brought the flavor of a street fair to the dinner table with little more than a skillet and a few minutes. Pre-cooked Italian sausage links browned quickly until their casings crackled and juices sizzled across the pan. Sliced onions and bell peppers joined the heat, softening and caramelizing as they soaked up the seasoned drippings. Hoagie rolls warmed in the oven until lightly crisp on the outside and tender within. When the vegetables turned golden, the sausages nestled into the rolls, draped with the sweet pepper and onion mixture, and a light scatter of shredded provolone if desired. Each bite balanced smoky spice, soft bread, and the gentle sweetness of slow-cooked vegetables. The meal felt festive, yet required almost no effort, making it a favorite for families who wanted bold taste without a long cooking session. Served with a simple green salad or a handful of chips, these hoagies brought the spirit of an Italian street vendor into a busy kitchen, showing that fast food can still be deeply satisfying and full of character when prepared with care and served piping hot. Red beans and rice was a Monday tradition that stretched pennies into a meal rich enough to satisfy any hunger. Dried red beans were soaked overnight, then simmered all day with a ham bone, onion, celery, and bell pepper until they became creamy and thick. The ham bone contributed smoky, salty depth that infused every bean while the vegetables melted into the pot, creating layers of flavor. Served over white rice, the combination provided complete protein. Beans and rice together offered amino acids that neither could provide alone. A pound of dried beans and a ham bone that cost almost nothing fed one senior for an entire week when portioned carefully. The dish was traditionally made on Mondays because it could simmer unattended while other chores were done. Each reheating made the beans thicker and more flavorful than the day before. Red beans and rice was more than just economical. It was heritage cooking that connected seniors to generations of families who had survived on this same humble, nourishing combination. Sardines on crackers with onion and mustard was never anyone's idea of a celebration, but it sure was dinner. On the nights when nothing was thawed, the stove stayed cold and Grandma was too tired to fuss. This is what came out. The sardines came straight from the tin, laid out on saltines or toast rounds. A sliver of raw onion went on top, followed by a little mustard, just enough to punch it up. It was salty, it was sharp, and it was surprisingly satisfying. You could eat 3 or 4 and call it a night, or serve them with a boiled egg and call it fancy. They were high in protein, low in cost, and required zero prep. Lent, lean budgets, or hot summers, this was a go-to. Kids turned up their noses. Adults cleaned their plates. It was not glamorous, but it worked. And in homes where nothing went to waste and every bite counted, that was enough. You might not crave it now, but if you grew up with it, you never really forgot. Breakfast for dinner. Pancake stack with bacon turned a morning favorite into a fun and filling evening meal. Flour, milk, eggs, and a little baking powder whisked together quickly to form a smooth batter that poured onto a sizzling griddle, sending up a sweet, buttery aroma. Each pancake bubbled and browned in just minutes, ready to stack high while crisp bacon strips cooked in a nearby skillet. The smoky scent of bacon mingled with the warm fragrance of fresh pancakes, creating a kitchen atmosphere both cozy and exciting. Butter melted between layers, while a slow drizzle of warm maple syrup cascaded over the stack, soaking each fluffy round. The salty bacon provided the perfect counterpoint to the soft, sweet pancakes, making every bite a blend of textures and tastes. Families loved the playful switch of serving breakfast at the end of the day, and cleanup was minimal, leaving more time to relax. In less than 20 minutes, this meal offered pure comfort and a gentle reminder that the best dinners are sometimes the ones that break the rules in the most delicious way possible. Potato and egg skillet was the meal that seniors turned to when the refrigerator held almost nothing but the pantry still needed to produce dinner. Leftover potatoes or freshly boiled ones were cubed and fried in bacon grease until the edges turned crispy and golden. Eggs were cracked directly into the skillet and stirred through the potatoes, cooking into soft curds that clung to every piece. Salt, pepper, and perhaps some dried onion flakes were the only seasonings needed to create something deeply comforting. The dish cost almost nothing. Potatoes were cheap by the bag, and eggs were pennies apiece. Yet it provided complete protein and enough substance to satisfy real hunger. Many seniors remembered eating this during the Depression, when such simple combinations kept families alive. The crispy potato edges contrasted beautifully with the soft scrambled eggs, creating textures that made each bite interesting. Potato and egg skillet was proof that poverty cooking could still produce something genuinely delicious. Fried potatoes and onion skillet was a fast, hearty stovetop meal that showed up in countless kitchens when times were tough and bellies needed filling without much fuss or money. You would slice up potatoes, chop some onions, heat a little oil or butter in the skillet, and fry everything until golden and crispy. That was it. It sounds simple now, but back when groceries were scarce and time was short, this was a meal that worked. The potatoes filled everyone up, the onions added flavor, and the skillet turned humble pantry staples into something hot, hearty, and satisfying. Some folks added eggs, bacon, or herbs if they had them, but most kept it practical and affordable. You would find this recipe scribbled on old note cards, tucked into Grandma's cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations of families who knew how to stretch every last ingredient. Fried potatoes and onions might seem forgotten today, but back then, it was a reliable fix for hungry families trying to make groceries last, keep dinner on the table, and survive the lean weeks when every meal counted just a little more. Chili Mac skillet was comfort food that came together in a single pan and satisfied cravings for something hearty and warming. Ground beef was browned with onions, then chili powder, cumin, and a can of tomatoes transformed the mixture into something boldly flavored. Elbow macaroni was added directly to the skillet, along with enough water to cook the pasta, and the whole thing simmered until the noodles were tender and had absorbed the spiced tomato liquid. Shredded cheese melted over the top created strings of gooey richness that made each bite feel indulgent. The dish was adaptable. Kidney beans could be added for extra protein, corn for sweetness, or extra chili powder for those who liked heat. A single skillet of chili mac fed one person for 3 meals, making it both economical and practical for seniors living alone. The combination of protein, carbohydrates, and vegetables in one dish meant balanced nutrition without preparing multiple components. Chili mac was honest, filling, and exactly what a cold evening demanded. Beef and onion sandwich spread proved that deli leftovers could turn into a hearty supper in almost no time. Thin slices of roast beef, whether from a weekend dinner or the grocery counter, were chopped fine and folded into a bowl of mayonnaise and diced onions. A splash of Worcestershire sauce and a pinch of black pepper added depth, while the onions provided crunch and a sharp bite. The mixture chilled for just a few minutes while bread toasted and plates were set. Then it was piled thick between slices of rye or soft white sandwich bread. Some families liked a layer of crisp lettuce for freshness, while others spooned the spread onto crackers for an easy snack that still felt like a meal. It stretched a small amount of beef into several servings, saving both time and money while still tasting indulgent. Each bite combined creamy texture with savory meat and a gentle onion heat, the kind of simple pleasure that keeps everyone coming back for seconds. Quick to make, rich to eat, this spread turned odds and ends into a dinner worth remembering, proving that thrift and flavor can happily share the same table. Quick macaroni and stewed tomatoes was one of those meals that showed up when there was not much left in the pantry, but families still needed dinner on the table fast. You boiled some elbow macaroni, opened a can of stewed tomatoes, and stirred it all together with salt, pepper, and a little butter if you could spare it. That was it. It sounds humble, but back when budgets were tight and grocery trips were rare, this simple stovetop meal came through. The pasta filled you up, the tomatoes added flavor, and it all came together in under 10 minutes. You would find recipes like this scribbled in old cookbooks, passed down from one generation to the next, or clipped from women's magazines that promised fast, filling meals on a shoestring budget. It might seem plain now, but quick macaroni and stewed tomatoes helped plenty of families stretch their groceries and make dinner happen, even on the hardest days. Minute steak with ketchup glaze was a favorite when Grandma needed to make dinner fast but still wanted it to feel like something special. She would pull out a thin cut of beef. Sometimes it was actually labeled minute steak, other times it was just the least expensive cut sitting in the butcher's case. She would heat a skillet until it was almost smoking, toss the steak in with a little oil or butter, and sear both sides until it browned and sizzled. That alone would have been enough, but Grandma liked to give it a little extra. She made a glaze from plain ketchup and a splash of Worcestershire sauce. If she had a bit of sugar or vinegar, she might toss that in too, just to give it a little zing. It would bubble up right there in the pan, coating the steak in a sticky, tangy sauce that clung to the edges and caramelized just enough. Served with mashed potatoes or on plain sandwich bread, it was the closest thing you got to steak night without the steakhouse. It came together in minutes, fed everyone full, and left just one pan to clean. That glaze? It made it magic. Hamburger hash was the weeknight miracle that turned a quarter pound of ground beef into a complete dinner for pennies. During the lean decades of the mid-20th century, seniors living alone discovered that browning ground beef with diced potatoes and onions created something far greater than the sum of its parts. The meat released its fat into the skillet, crisping the potatoes while the onions caramelized into sweet strands that wove through every bite. A splash of Worcestershire sauce and black pepper transformed the humble mixture into something deeply savory. The beauty of hamburger hash was its forgiving nature. It accepted leftover peas, corn, or green beans without complaint, stretching the meal further. One skillet fed one person for 2 meals, making it economical for those watching every dime. The crispy bottom that formed against the cast iron became the most coveted part, scraped up and savored last. This wasn't fancy cooking, but it was honest food that kept countless seniors fed and satisfied. Egg and potato hash turned scraps into a filling supper that could be on the table before the day's stories were finished. Leftover boiled potatoes were diced and tossed into a hot skillet with a bit of butter until their edges crisped to a golden brown. Eggs were cracked directly over the sizzling potatoes, their yolks breaking to coat each bite in a rich sauce as they cooked. A sprinkle of salt, pepper, and maybe a dash of paprika was all it needed. The aroma of frying potatoes and eggs promised satisfaction and thrift, a meal built from yesterday's extras and today's needs. Served straight from the pan, the hash invited everyone to eat family style, forks clinking as the steam rose. It proved that speed never had to sacrifice comfort and that the best dinners often came from making the most of what was already on hand. Cinnamon sugar butter toast was the kind of simple comfort food that could brighten up an afternoon in under 10 minutes, especially when there was not much else to work with. You toasted up some bread, slathered it with butter, sprinkled on cinnamon and sugar, and called it a snack. That was it. Quick, sweet, and surprisingly satisfying when groceries were scarce and everyone needed a little pick-me-up. It sounds simple, but back then, families leaned on recipes like this to stretch ingredients and turn basic pantry staples into something that felt like a treat. The butter gave it richness, the cinnamon sugar added sweetness, and the toast made it crunchy enough to feel special. You would find this little recipe scribbled onto old note cards, tucked into community cookbooks, or passed down through generations as a fast, affordable way to keep kids happy and tummies full. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of homes back then, cinnamon sugar butter toast was the perfect fix for long afternoons and short grocery lists. There was something almost ceremonial about pan-fried potatoes and onions with an egg on top. Grandma would cube the potatoes, chop the onions, and let them sizzle in a cast-iron skillet until they were browned and crispy. The smell alone could carry through the whole house. At the very end, she would crack an egg right into the center and let it cook sunny side up, the yolk just soft enough to run a little when you cut into it. No meat, no toast, just 3 simple ingredients that together felt like more than enough. This was dinner for lean weeks, meatless Fridays, or long stretches between paychecks. The potatoes filled you up, the onions gave it flavor, and the egg brought everything together. It was hearty, honest, and completely satisfying. Served in a bowl or straight from the skillet, it made the kind of meal that slowed you down and reminded you to be grateful, even if all you had was a sack of potatoes and a few eggs left in the carton. These were meals that came from resourcefulness, not recipes, and somehow that always tasted better. Pork chop rice skillet was the kind of meal that simmered away while seniors rested in their chairs, filling small apartments with the aroma of home cooking. A single bone-in pork chop, often purchased on sale for mere cents per pound, was browned in a well-seasoned skillet until golden. Rice was added directly to the pan along with water or broth, and the whole thing was covered and left to cook slowly until the rice absorbed every drop of porky flavor. The meat became fork tender, practically falling off the bone, while the rice turned creamy and rich from the rendered fat. Some added a can of cream of mushroom soup to make it even more substantial, while others kept it simple with just salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. The dish required almost no attention once assembled, making it perfect for those with limited energy or mobility. One pork chop and a cup of rice fed a senior for an entire day, proving that economy and satisfaction could share the same plate. Hamburger crumble over mashed potatoes felt like a backwards meatloaf, and that was exactly the point. Instead of baking everything together, Grandma browned the ground beef in a skillet, sometimes with onions, sometimes with just salt and pepper. Then she would whip up instant mashed potatoes or use leftovers from the night before. The beef went right on top, hot, greasy, and just barely seasoned, soaking into the potatoes like gravy. It was fast. It was easy. It was the kind of dinner you made when nobody could agree on anything but they all needed to eat. No ketchup glaze, no breadcrumbs, just the bare bones of a meat and potatoes meal. It was humble, but filling, messy, but comforting. And every now and then she would throw some peas on top or a handful of cheese. But even plain, it worked. It always worked. In homes where food had to stretch, this was one of the smartest tricks in the book. Cornmeal. Crusted catfish fillets brought the taste of a southern fish fry to the table in minutes, turning thin fillets into golden perfection. A simple dredge of cornmeal seasoned with salt, pepper, and a hint of cayenne coated the fish, while oil heated in a cast-iron skillet. As soon as the fillets touched the pan, they sizzled and released a savory aroma that promised a feast. In only a few minutes, each side crisped to a deep golden brown, while the flesh stayed tender and flaky. Remember those working man's dinners you could make in just 10 minutes after a long day on the line? These dinners filled mid-century kitchens with quick heat, heavy plates, and the smell of hard work turning into comfort. What did those rushed but satisfying nights give us that slower meals never could? Sardine and onion sandwiches were one of those quick, no-frills meals that filled hungry workers up fast and showed up in plenty of lunch pails across America. You opened a tin of sardines, laid them on rye bread, added some raw onion slices, and that was it. Simple, salty, and ready in under 10 minutes. It might sound harsh now, but back when protein was hard to come by and groceries were scarce, this was a go-to meal. The sardines gave you the protein, the onions added bite, and the rye bread kept you full. You would find this sandwich scribbled into old cookbooks, passed around among factory workers, or tucked into lunch boxes for folks heading out the door. It was never fancy, but it worked. Today, most people have forgotten how handy meals like this were, but back then, sardine and onion sandwiches helped plenty of families stretch what little they had and stay full through long, hard days. Creamed peas on toast was a gentle meal that seniors loved for its soft textures and mild, comforting flavor. A can of sweet peas was drained and folded into a simple white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, creating something that looked plain but tasted like pure comfort. The creamy sauce clung to each pea, transforming the humble vegetable into something that felt almost luxurious. Spooned over toast, preferably slightly stale bread that had been toasted crisp, the dish became a complete meal that was easy to chew and gentle on aging digestive systems. A single can of peas and 2 slices of bread fed one person adequately, costing mere pennies. The dish could be made richer with a hard-boiled egg chopped through or a sprinkle of cheese melted on top. Creamed peas on toast represented a gentler time when meals didn't need to be bold or exciting. Sometimes soft, warm, and familiar was exactly what the body and soul needed after a long day alone. There is something about a fried bologna sandwich with yellow mustard that never really leaves you. Grandma would slice a thick round of bologna and toss it onto a hot skillet. As it browned, it would puff up in the center, curling into a little cup with crisp edges and sizzling sides. She would slap it onto a slice of white bread, smear on some yellow mustard, the real kind, tangy and bright, and fold it up like a letter you could eat. That was dinner. No side dish, no dessert, just a hot sandwich that hit the spot in less than 5 minutes. The smell of frying bologna was unmistakable. Part school lunch, part diner counter, part home. It was cheap, fast, and unforgettable. You might not see it on a dinner menu, but it fed generations of kids and kept more than a few households running when money ran thin. And if you ever had one fresh off the skillet, you probably still remember the first bite. Chicken fricassee was old-fashioned comfort that transformed tough, inexpensive chicken parts into tender, gravy-smothered perfection. Before boneless breasts dominated supermarket cases, Seniors bought leg quarters for pennies and knew how to coax flavor from every piece. The chicken was dredged in seasoned flour and browned slowly in a deep skillet, building a fond on the bottom that would become rich gravy. Onions and celery joined the pan before liquid was added, and the whole pot simmered until the meat fell from the bones. The gravy thickened naturally from the flour coating, creating a velvety sauce that begged to be soaked up with bread or rice. One chicken leg quarter could feed a senior for 2 meals, when stretched with plenty of gravy over something starchy. The dish was forgiving, patient, and deeply satisfying. The kind of cooking that required time but rewarded it generously with flavor and nourishment that modern convenience foods simply cannot match. Which forgotten one-pan dinner would you bring back to your table? Drop your memories in the comments, hit like and subscribe for more lost recipes worth remembering.